Hey everyone, welcome back. In the previous episode, we took a look at setting up the backbone for implementing the sign-in redirect, where we go ahead, craft our own URL that redirects us to the login page and then to the authorization endpoint, and then back to our client, where we then go ahead, finally extract the stuff from the URL and store it in our local storage. Now, if you are ever lost in the future with the implicit flow, come back to this episode, and this is essentially the starting point of just being able to set up the bare minimum and obtaining your access token. And from this point on, you can reason about how to implement it using other libraries, etc., and what you're trying to achieve. Now, in this episode, we're going to take a look at using a library, and we're going to look at some other options that exist as well, but very briefly. So if I take a look at the browser, the main library you will find if you're going to be implementing JavaScript clients with OpenID Connect is the oidc client. You'll probably see Brock Allen in charge of this thing. It's in the identity model library. So this is made by the guys who made IdentityServer. Okay, and this is the standard thing that I've used. I've also used the Angular auth oidc package, and this is when I was working with Ionic and Angular. And the way you implement oidc in Ionic is actually through in-app browsers, and you actually end up using the method that we implemented in this first episode because these libraries don't really give you so much control about the in-app browser, right? So if you're using Cordova, the first episode was really the most of what you need. So yeah, if you're using Angular, you're going to be using this library. React IDC, I literally just googled this and the first thing that came up. And again, this is just a wrapper for this original library. So if you're using Angular, stop doing it, okay? And React, I mean, you're just going to probably end up using oidc-client. Now, I don't want to do npm install or anything like that. I will leave all these links in the description. I'm going to go ahead and grab a link for this library here. Let's go ahead, copy this, and I'm going to go into the index page. And I'm just going to basically remove this, and let's go ahead and add a script for this thing. Now, the primary thing I actually forgot to mention, the goal here is to implement the sign-in flow with this library, and then we're going to retrieve the access token, and then we're going to use it to access an API. Okay, so for this I will need the oidc client, and I want to grab axios as well, which is essentially, if you don't know what axios is, get to know, because this is a very nice library to make HTTP requests. Basically a JavaScript HTTP client. Okay, and let's put it below here. And below here is where we will put our JavaScript. So let's go ahead and make a new folder where I will just call it JS and maybe something like old. And I'll grab these two and put them in there because we don't need them anymore, right? And we can collapse that folder so we no longer have to look at them. Next, let's go ahead and create a main.js. And in this main.js is where we're going to do most of the work for signing in, right? And it's not going to be too much work. What we really want to do is gain access to this oidc client. And if you're going to be using it inside VS Code with like some CLI tools and it's going to be a SPA application, you're most likely going to have some IntelliSense support. So before we start writing in this main JS, let's quickly go back to the documentation. I'll close this oidc client link and axios. And for this library, your main source of information will be either the samples folder or the wiki page. And on the wiki page, if you scroll away all down to the bottoms, again, it has links to all the samples in different frameworks that it has already been implemented. So if you're ever lost, go to either of these two places. The wiki page also shows the information how to implement this stuff, and I'm just gonna be glancing over the wiki page and implementing it and sort of explaining a little bit more about what is going on. So primarily what this part tells us about is that this user manager is the primary object that we're going to be using to control this whole flow, users, and the whole shebang, right? So we are going to be using this user manager. And here is how we can configure this user manager. So these are all different options. And we really, right for now, we are only concerned with the required settings right here. So let's go ahead and create an object with these settings, right? So here it says the constructor of the user manager is expecting these settings. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a file, or sorry, let's create an object where we're going to be putting in these values, which is authority, client ID, redirect URI, response type, and scope. We're already familiar with these. We've seen them like 100 times. So let's create var config new object. So first one was authority. Next one was client ID, response type, redirect URI, and the last one was scope. Right. So I'll just put them in the same order so it's a little bit less confusing. Right, so for all these values, we already have them, and if we go into JS old signin, this is where our values are. If you don't know where these values come from, watch the previous episode. So for our redirect URI, this is the value. So redirect URI is where are we going to be redirected back to our JavaScript client. Authority is this part here. Let's go ahead and put this here. A client ID was client ID.js, so let's put this here. A response type was ID token and token, so this is where we are requesting our ID token and access token. And scope was OpenID and API1. If you don't know what OpenID is, go watch the authorization code episode. Right, so we have the basic configuration. Let's close the sign-in file and let's come back. So this is essentially the configuration that we're going to pass to the user manager object. And the way we access the user manager object is through the kind of the oidc namespace, right? So they don't really state it clearly out loud from the documentation, but this is essentially what we want to do. We want to declare a parameter of user manager. We want to grab oidc, and we actually want to say new oidc user manager, and this is actually capital letter and constructor, and we are going to be passing in stuff into the constructor. Right, so at this point we have a user manager, and what I want to do now is I want to load the application, and we'll take a look at what kind of methods we have available to us. So here I am on the client. If I open developer tools, if you don't know, so we're getting an error. Looks like I didn't spell manager correctly, so let's go ahead and put an A here, manager. Go back into the program and give this a proper refresh. Let me get rid of all these stuff. And basically, when you type in the console in Google Chrome, you get something close to IntelliSense, which, well, it is pretty much IntelliSense. So if we type in oidc, you will get the object, and here you'll be able to look at your user manager. You will also have access to your user manager object that you have created here and any other variables that you have. So we have access to our config, which we can print here, and we can take a look at it, right? So user manager, this is a neat little way you can look at the methods, and some of these methods are like sign in, sign out, and all these different variations that we're not going to take a look at all of them, but just to give you an idea of what they can be like. So the primary one that we want to do is sign in redirect, which is what we have implemented in the previous episode. So let's go ahead and just call this function, right? So sign in redirect, call this function, and we get a promise. Now, if you'll see, the first error that we get is that it's blocked by a course issue that essentially basically says, right, we tried to get this oidc configuration from the well-known endpoint. That is why we didn't have to specify our authorization route for the authority. It's going to find out by itself. But essentially, it can't access this endpoint, right? So we have to allow for course to happen. We can do this in a couple of ways. For identity server, and if we go into the configuration, and for the client, we can say allow course origins, and this is a list of strings, and all we have to do is basically pass in our client ID, and let's put it below the redirect URIs, and put a space here as well, and a comma here. Okay, so let's see if this helps us. And while that's loading, we can go ahead and actually just implement the sign in button to do the function that we want it to do, right? So var sign in equals function user manager sign in redirect. Okay, now going back to the client, let's pop the console open, Control F5, sure we don't get any errors, and let's press sign in. And looks like I maybe have misspelled it. Sign in redirect. Yep, small I. And this is why when you're going to be using it in a proper development environment for JavaScript, you're actually going to be able to see this IntelliSense, right? Not so much for Visual Studio. So VS Code is a lot better for this. But let's go ahead, sign in again, and boosh, right? So we are now at our identity server. Let's go ahead, Bob, password, sign in, and we're at the extract tokens page, but we have removed our JavaScript here, so because we moved it into a different file, so we don't have access to it anymore. Let's go ahead back into the application. This is the, actually it looks like this is the old stuff that we had in our local storage, so let's go ahead and remove that. I will minimize this for now, and the thing that will happen is what we did here was manual loading in the sign-in callback. What we want to do now is we'll go to the index page, we'll grab this OIDC client, and we will make the OIDC client do the heavy lifting for us, right? And let's go ahead and get rid of this extract tokens part. And the thing that we'll need to do is utilize one of the functions again to basically grab the state from our URL, put it in the local storage, and then pop back to wherever we need to, right? So let's go ahead, take a look back at the home page where we have access to our user manager. And another one of the functions, if I clear the console, we'll look at sign in callback, and this is the function that will essentially allow us to process the callback. Okay, so now let's go ahead. We won't need to take as big of a step in terms of supplying the config, but we will still need to provide the sort of JavaScript. So actually we don't want to really create a file for this. Let's go ahead and open up a script tag right here. We will grab the way we create the user manager. So we want the user manager. Let's scrap the config. And nice, I don't get formatting as usual. Let's grab user manager and let's say sign in callback. And this is going to return a promise, right? So after it's going to load all the stuff, we then want to basically grab the result. Let's, I can't actually remember what this was going to be, so let's console log it. I don't think it was going to be anything eventful, but after it, we can go ahead and did what we did before. We can Windows location, basically redirect to the home page. And again, there we go. Right, so let's try this out. Let's go into Google Chrome here, give this a nice refresh, clear the console, make sure the application is empty. Okay, so let's sign in. Looks like it's recompiling something in the background. Okay, and we're on the home index. So we didn't get the part where we actually put in our credentials because we haven't signed out from IdentityServer. I actually haven't made a tutorial about how to sign out, but I'll make an episode on that. But we should have gotten something in our storage, and here is our session storage. I'm wondering if I reopen this and I look into the local storage, I'm gonna have something. Nope, it seems like everything is going to be in the session storage. But yeah, essentially we have access token, ID token, and all the other stuff that comes back with requesting an access token, right? So at this point, if we can just go ahead, close everything, so we will clear the state and we can inspect this process once again. And I think because it's in the session storage, it's actually going to clear on when we close the browser. Yeah. So there we go. Nothing in here. So let's go ahead, peek at the console, and it should be either undefined or something. If we sign in, when I said undefined or something, that's when we were console logging the result from the promise. But I don't think there is anything in there or anything particularly useful, right? So let's sign in. And actually, before we redirect, that's very useful stuff here, which is essentially everything that we need. So now if we grab the user manager, we have actually an access to a function called getUser as well. So this is where we would grab the user and user related information, right? So let's go ahead, store this in the user, and let's await on this because this is a promise. Okay, so that process returned nothing, but if we then go ahead and log the user, we can see all the stuff basically that is now stored in the session. So we're essentially signed in now, and we can see a bunch of different information. Okay, so now that we have signed in, what we want to do is grab our axios instance and put our access token in it. So then when we make a request, our access token is in the header. Okay, so remember, the way that we grab the user is user manager, get user, this is a promise, and then there we can go ahead and grab the access token from the result. And what we want to do is put it in our axios instance. Okay, so we'll close the sign-in page and we'll talk a little bit more about basically redirecting to the same place that you came from later on. But for now, all we want to do is access an API, which is basically the primary reason why you'd want to do this. So the rest is more about user experience and making things comfortable. So yeah. What we want to do is once we get the user manager, so this function is going to sort of stay here, and really it's going to work when the button is going to get pressed, right? So what we want to do is we want to grab the user manager and call the get user not function, but yeah, function that's going to return a promise. And then we are going to get the result, which is going to be the user. Okay, and if the user is something, so we can basically console log, and we can say that this is the user, and we can console log the user here. And if we have the user, let's go ahead and grab axios, right? So we're going to have access to axios because we have imported it here. And what we can do is we can go ahead and grab defaults header and set it to a new string. And actually putting it in the wrong place here almost. We want to go to common, grab the authorization header and set it to bearer and input the access token here. So user access token, I think it was. I don't know if we still have access. We do, and it's going to be access underscore token. So just like that. Okay, so let's see if we can also implement a, what's it called, a button to use axios. So we're going to get blocked by course again, and this is a common issue that happens, and I'm going to show you how to basically fix that issue. So let's go ahead and first implement the function. So let's call var call API, and we're just going to console log this because this is not about building JavaScript applications. This is about setting up the infrastructure with IdentityServer and using tools, right? So let's call the API, let's call function, we'll call get, and let's go ahead and where we had a good example in our MVC client and home controller. Let's grab where we got the secret right here, and let's put this here, and then we can grab the result and we can console log the result. Okay, and let's go ahead and make a button for this. So I will put a div here so it's on a new line. Let's grab the button and let's say call API, and whoa, let's say grab this function, put it here. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the client and see if we get any errors. I'm going to give this a refresh. I'll clear the console as well. Okay, so here you can see the user information being logged. And the next thing is that we cannot read property comment of undefined. So header is undefined. So let's go ahead into main.js, and it's not header, it's headers. Let's go ahead back here and give this a refresh. Okay, now we don't get an error. So I'm assuming if I call axios, maybe axios default headers. No, not that easy with axios. Doesn't really matter too much. Let's clear this and let's call the API. And nope, seems like we have an error that we're not logging. If we go back here, okay, my bad. Our API is not running at all. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to close here, and I really want to show you the error with the course as well. So let's go ahead and just start up, add the API I want to start up, and we'll run into the course issue. So now you know what it looks like, and then you will know how to fix it as well. Okay, so there we go. Let's start this up. Okay, so there we are. Let's sign in. Bob, password, sign in. Okay, we're back here. Let's open up the console. There's our user. If we want to take a look at the object, we can. Let's call the API. Okay, and this is essentially the error that you're going to get. Sometimes it's going to be disguised under an actual server error. So there's a bit of ambiguity there, but essentially access control allow origin, header is not present. So this is essentially what we want to fix now. So let's go into API 1, startup, and first we want to go to services and set up a rule for the course that we're gonna basically set up a course rule, right? So for which clients we're gonna be allowing, and usually for development you want to allow everything. For live or production you want to allow specific ones, right? So you want to put if statements here and grab your URLs from the configuration, right? But essentially the config will look something like this. You grab the configuration function, you add a policy, and here we basically want to state the name, allow all, and next thing is configuring the policy. So we're basically saying, right, where are the requests allowed to come from, and really we just want to say from any origin. Let me drop these down to new lines so it's a little bit easier to perceive these. Allow any origin, allow any method, allow any header, and was there anything else? Any header, method, and allow credentials. Okay, so you want to set these four, right? And now that we have set up the sort of rule that we want to use, we now want to go into our middleware and we want to use this course rule. So let's go ahead and say app use course, and here we basically just say what kind of rule we want to use, and we'll just say we want to allow all. And I think it's smart to put this at the start here, maybe. Yeah. Okay, let's launch this and see what happens. Okay, and this error seems to be telling us that we're not allowed to allow all credentials, so let's remove this line and launch again. Okay, so now that we're here, let's sign in, Bob password. Okay, open up the console and let's call API. And here we are, basically we get the secret message from API 1, and if we close this, at this point we're essentially successfully setting up the sign-in, and we now know how to use the access token with Axios and how to basically set it up from the beginning with the user manager. So if you have a SPA application, you're going to do something similar to a initialization process where you have an init function. This is where you're going to basically have this process of setting up your user manager, and you're going to be getting the user. You're going to see if there's anything in the local storage. And if there is, set it to Axios. If not, you might want to redirect to some other page. You might have a bunch of different stuff, okay? But the point is that the user manager is essentially the interface with all the information that you have about the user. And in the future episodes, we'll dive a little bit more into this. And this will be it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. Don't forget to join the Discord server. Link is in the description. And as always, see you in my other episodes.